Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hey, have you read this book? The book I'm talking about is The Rise and Fall of Alan Bond by Paul Berry. This book was first published in 1990, but is still available from the library. So who was Alan Bond? Some of you may remember him as a sporting hero who took the America's Cup off the Americans. Alan Bond was born in London in 1938, the youngest of two children. Alan often skipped school and was a terror. Instead of doing what the teachers told him to do, he just did what he wanted. After the war, there were still shortages of food and other goods. The Bonds decided that Australia would be a better place to live. They settled in Fremantle. Just as in England, Alan was always playing truant. At 13 years of age, he went missing. 6 months later, the police found him and returned him to his parents. Bond became an apprentice signwriter when he was 14, but was dismissed 3 years later for taking too many days off. He started his own signwriting business called New Signs. Bond's reputation was not good. New Signs were getting a lot of complaints about the standard of its work. At 22, Bond started borrowing money to buy land around Perth and reselling it in blocks. To pay the interest from the loans, Bond took money from his business. Bond made many enemies by not paying bills and wages on time, using the money to buy more land instead. He was despised for his arrogant manner. Bond's business partners had enough and quit. Bond became a sailor by chance. Bond's company would take cars or boats in payment for land. This is how he became owner of an ocean racer. Bond had 3 unsuccessful challenges for the America's Cup. Then in 1983, his boat Australia 2, a 12-metre racer with a secret wing keel designed by Ben Lexon, won the race. After Bond's yacht won the America's Cup, Bond's fame gave him the confidence to grow his empire. He borrowed millions of dollars from banks in America and Asia to acquire oil wells, airships, newspapers and TV stations. Bond always had problems with cash flow and being very persuasive, convinced Brian Burke, the Premier of WA, to invest in Bond's property development schemes. The state lost hundreds of millions of dollars from the superannuation fund, while Bond made huge profits. By borrowing $1.2 billion from the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, Bond acquired Castlemaine Toohey, the brand which sold the most beer in Queensland and New South Wales. However, the brewery started to lose sales as soon as Bond got his hands on it. Bond gave publicans 30 days' notice to quit their premises without compensation or sign a new lease to stay in the pub. This meant that the publican would be left with nothing, instead of the $500,000 or so they thought they could sell their business for. The public was disgusted with Bond's arrogance and with how he treated the people who were selling his product. The publicans no longer tried to sell Toohey's beer and pushed the competitor's beer instead. This meant that the Bond Corp was losing millions of dollars in sales. While the publican fought for their rights, Bond carried on living his extravagant lifestyle. His art collection included Van Gogh's irises, which he borrowed $54 million to pay for. Bond's best mate was Laurie Connell. The public invested $900 million in Rothwell's bank over 6 years. Instead of that money being reinvested, Connell spent most of this money living a life of luxury. In 1987, when Rothwell's could not pay interest to its depositors, it was Bond who came up with a plan of rescue, but Rothwell's could not be saved. After the stock market crash in 1987, Bond's empire grew and grew. spending $5 billion buying companies including Bell Resources and Bell Group. There was speculation that Bond Corp was in trouble. The TV documentary Four Corners revealed that Bond's accounting practices were fraudulent. The financial reports show that the sale of Sydney Hilton made millions in profit, but the sale was falsified to make it appear that Bond Corp was making a huge profit. In fact, Bond Corp was not able to pay dividends to its shareholders. The game was up and the banks wanted their money back. By 1991, Bond Corp owed more than $1 billion. Bond became bankrupt. However, Bond's personal wealth and several properties were out of reach of the liquidators as they were tied up in family trusts. To me, the law regarding family trusts being used to protect assets in this way is not right. The wealth and properties owned by the trusts should have been seized, as they were bought using money obtained by fraudulent means and borrowed money which was still owing. Even though Bond and the other Bond Corp directors spent time in prison for fraud, I don't think justice was really done. After serving his time, Bond carried on doing business until he died in June this year, but that is another story. So let's take a look at why Bond was able to get away with what he did for so long. Firstly, the auditors for Bond Corp were either incompetent or corrupt, as they did not find the fraudulent accounting practices which Four Corners uncovered. Secondly, corporate regulation in the 1980s was weak. Australia's NCSC was inadequately funded and it just didn't have the resources to investigate fraud properly. Lastly, and most importantly, the deregulation of the financial markets in 1984 turned out to be a huge mistake. Because money was now able to be moved freely between countries, Bond Corp evaded tax by using the Cook Islands as a tax haven. The big corporations are still evading tax by declaring their profits in countries where the tax rate is low. Also, deregulation allowed the banks to operate how they wanted, replacing common sense with greed and allowing people like Bond to accumulate mountains of debt. The banks charged million-dollar fees to lend money to Bond, not knowing that Bond had used the same asset as security on other loans. These bad practices led to the 2008 GFC, in which millions of people lost their life savings or homes. I think you will enjoy reading this fascinating book. You could say it's about how not to operate a business. Thanks for watching.